The lights of Los Angeles glittered outside the ABC studios as the "Jimmy Kimmel Live" sign flickered in electric blue. Inside, the audience buzzed with excitement. Tonight's guest wasn't just another Hollywood name, it was Denzel Washington. Calm, charismatic, and commanding, Denzel stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. Jimmy Kimmel greeted him with his signature grin, but even he sensed a different energy in the air. Something about Denzel's expression, quiet, focused, purposeful, hinted that this interview would be unlike any other. "Denzel, man, you've been trending all week," Jimmy began, half laughing. "Everyone saw your tweet about Trump's Asia trip. What's going on there?" The crowd chuckled, expecting Denzel to shrug it off. But instead, he leaned forward, clasping his hands, and took a deep breath before speaking. "You know, Jimmy," he said in that deep, deliberate voice that filled the room, "I've seen a lot in my time. But watching a president represent this country like that overseas, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. The way he mocked people, the way he dismissed our allies, that's not leadership. That's ego on parade." The audience grew silent. Jimmy's grin faded slightly. Denzel continued, his tone firm but calm. "This isn't about politics. It's about dignity. When you stand on the world stage, you're not just representing yourself, you're representing every American watching back home. And right now, the world is watching us, and we're not giving them something to respect." Applause broke out, not the usual laughter-filled cheers, but the kind of deep, emotional clapping that comes when truth hits hard. Denzel glanced toward the cameras. He forgot that leadership is about humility. You can't demand respect when you've lost the world's trust. By the time the segment aired, Twitter had exploded. #TheWorldIsWatching was trending globally. Within hours of the Kimmel interview airing, the internet caught fire. Every major outlet clipped Denzel's calm yet devastating remarks, replaying the phrase, "the world is watching," on endless loop. Twitter threads dissected each moment, the pause before he spoke, the look in Kimmel's eyes, the way the audience went dead silent before erupting. CNN called it, "a masterclass in truth without rage." Fox tried to spin it as, Hollywood attacking patriotism, but even their comment sections filled with people saying, "He's not wrong." Trump's response came fast, an all-caps post on Truth Social, "Another Hollywood elite thinks he's better than the American people. Denzel should stick to movies and leave politics to the pros." The backlash only fueled the storm. TikTokers remixed Denzel's clip with slow-motion filters and dramatic soundtracks, late-night hosts praised his composure. The #TheWorldIsWatching hit 20 million views in 24 hours. Meanwhile, Denzel stayed silent. No follow-up interviews, no tweets. Just calm stillness, which only made the moment more powerful. On Reddit, users began sharing side-by-side videos, Trump shouting at reporters in Seoul, Denzel's quiet words about dignity. The contrast was brutal, undeniable. Internationally, South Korean media picked up the story, framing Denzel's words as a rare moment of American accountability. Newspapers in Tokyo and London quoted him like a moral compass. The Guardian wrote, "When actors speak with more integrity than politicians, perhaps we should listen." Inside the White House, staffers scrambled to manage the fallout. Trump demanded an apology on live TV. Denzel didn't respond, but his silence said everything. By the end of the week, what began as a talk show appearance had turned into something far greater, a cultural reckoning about leadership, respect, and the image of America in the eyes of the world. By the next morning, the clip of Denzel Washington's interview on Jimmy Kimmel Live had gone fully global. Networks in London, Tokyo, Paris, and Sydney opened their broadcasts with the same 8-second soundbite, "The world is watching, Jimmy." That line became more than just a phrase, it became a mirror reflecting America's image back to itself. In Seoul, university students played the video on massive outdoor screens, cheering and chanting in English, "Respect, not arrogance." In Berlin, a political cartoon showed Denzel as the voice of conscience, standing before a crumbling podium labeled Integrity. French newspapers called him l'Américain qui parle vrai, the American who spoke the truth. Even in conservative outlets across Asia, commentators admitted that Washington's tone struck a rare balance between criticism and patriotism. Inside Hollywood, the effect was electric. Actors, directors, and musicians began reposting the video with the same caption, "The world is watching." Oprah, Morgan Freeman, and Viola Davis each shared it within hours. But what truly shocked the political world was how military veterans and diplomats began to echo Denzel's message too. Retired generals tweeted support, saying, "He said what we can't." Former ambassadors went on CNN to explain how Trump's behavior during his Asia tour, cutting short meetings, mocking interpreters, walking out on reporters, had done irreparable damage to America's standing abroad. Meanwhile, Trump doubled down. During a rally in Texas, he sneered into the microphone, "We've got these actors, these Hollywood fakes, trying to tell me how to do my job. I've been to Asia, I've made deals, okay? The world respects us more than ever." But the crowd's cheers were weaker this time. Cameras caught a few people glancing down at their phones, rewatching Denzel's interview mid-speech. Back in Los Angeles, Denzel stayed quiet, choosing instead to meet privately with young filmmakers and journalists. "It's not about shouting," he told them. "It's about telling the truth so clearly that people can't ignore it." His words weren't a political attack, they were a moral statement. And that, perhaps, was what scared Trump the most. By midweek, the tremors from Denzel Washington's words had reached the Oval Office. Staffers whispered in hallways, watching the president scroll furiously through his phone, fuming over every headline. Denzel Washington challenges Trump's integrity. The actor who spoke what diplomats couldn't. America's moral voice isn't in Washington, it's in Hollywood. Trump slammed his hand on the resolute desk. "Get me a camera crew," he barked. "We're doing a response, tonight." The plan came together hastily, a nationally televised address disguised as a press statement. Advisors hoped to calm the narrative, but Trump had other ideas. He strode to the podium, red-faced and defiant, reading from cue cards he barely glanced at. This so-called actor, Denzel Washington, thinks he's some kind of global expert. He doesn't know what it's like to lead a nation. He's just another Hollywood hypocrite, pretending to care while living in a mansion. Even Fox anchors winced. The performance felt personal, brittle, less presidential, more desperate. Within minutes, the internet was flooded with side-by-side edits, Denzel's calm composure under studio lights versus Trump's finger-pointing fury in the White House. Memes labeled it leadership versus ego. But behind the scenes, something deeper was happening. Advisors reported donors growing nervous. Pollsters found that even among independents, approval ratings had dipped sharply after Trump's Asia remarks, and Denzel's viral critique had accelerated the slide. For the first time in months, late-night hosts weren't laughing at Trump, they were empathizing with America's embarrassment. In Los Angeles, Denzel watched the broadcast from his home office. He didn't gloat, didn't tweet. He simply shook his head and said quietly, "He still doesn't understand, it's not about me. It's about us." At that moment, millions of Americans seemed to agree that in the days following the Kimmel interview, Denzel Washington's words had grown far beyond a Hollywood soundbite. What began as a critique of Trump's Asia trip had turned into a movement, a rare fusion of celebrity conscience and public outrage. Talk shows dissected every syllable. Morning news anchors debated whether actors had the right to lecture politicians. But online, the verdict was already clear: America was listening to Denzel, not Washington, D.C. Clips of his calm, grounded delivery circulated on every platform. Students at universities from UCLA to Georgetown analyzed his tone in media studies classes. Activists turned his line, "The world is watching," into a rallying cry, printing it on protest signs and Twitter banners. For once, it wasn't just a trending topic, it was a mirror to a country struggling with its own reflection. Meanwhile, diplomats overseas quietly thanked him. A leaked email from a U.S. embassy staffer in Japan read, "Washington's comments may have damaged our image, but Denzel helped restore some respect." Even congressional aides admitted privately that the administration had mishandled the Asia trip. The fallout was no longer just about one speech, it was about credibility, dignity, and what it meant to represent America abroad. But Trump refused to back down. At another rally, he mocked Denzel's acting career, sneering, "He plays tough guys, but I'm the one making real deals." The comment backfired instantly. Late-night comedians roasted him. Denzel's old movie clips went viral with captions like, "Still more presidential than you." Through it all, Denzel stayed true to his silence. Reporters camped outside his home, hoping for another statement, but he never took the bait. In that silence, he gained something rarer than applause: respect. He had sparked a conversation that couldn't be spun, shouted down, or deleted. By week's end, the Washington Post declared it. One man spoke 10 words that shook the image of an entire presidency. By Friday morning, the tension between Hollywood and the White House had reached a fever pitch. Every media outlet from the New York Times to TMZ ran some version of the same story: Trump versus Denzel, the battle for America's soul. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was personal. The lines between entertainment and governance had blurred, and the entire country was watching it unfold like a national drama with no commercial break. Inside the West Wing, aides scrambled to contain the damage. The communications team begged Trump to pivot, to let the story die. But his pride wouldn't allow it. At 2 a.m., he fired off a post on his social platform: "Denzel Washington is overrated, arrogant, and desperate for attention. I built an empire, he just plays make-believe." Within minutes, it became one of the most ridiculed posts of his career. Memes exploded, late-night hosts howled, and the internet answered with a single phrase that trended for 72 hours straight: #MakeBelieve has more integrity. Meanwhile, Denzel was in Atlanta filming a new project. When asked by reporters about Trump's attack, he paused for a long moment before saying calmly, "If telling the truth makes me desperate, then maybe more of us should be desperate." The crowd erupted. His words echoed across social media, gaining millions of views in hours. What made the exchange historic wasn't the insults, it was what followed. Polling data released that weekend showed a shocking shift. Over half of registered voters said they trusted voices from culture and film more than voices from government. That number terrified Washington insiders. Suddenly, it wasn't Trump versus an actor. It was Trump versus America's conscience. And in that silent war of perception, Denzel had something the president never could: credibility. He didn't need a podium or a crowd. His truth carried its own gravity. As one journalist put it, when a man like Denzel Washington speaks, you don't just hear him. You feel the country pause. The backlash began quietly, a whisper that turned into a roar. Conservative media outlets launched a coordinated campaign to discredit Denzel Washington, painting him as another Hollywood elitist, trying to lecture the working class. They combed through his past interviews, twisting old quotes to make him look hypocritical. Hashtags like #FakeHeroDenzel started trending, pushed by political bots and anonymous accounts. Yet, ironically, the smear only amplified his message. The more they attacked him, the more people started watching the original interview for themselves, and realizing just how composed, sincere, and brutally honest he had been. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump's advisors were panicking. Polling showed that independent voters, especially those under 40, were siding with Denzel's critique. They admired his courage, his restraint, and the fact that he didn't shout or insult, even when provoked. "We're losing the narrative," muttered one aide during a late-night strategy meeting. "Every time he stays silent, Trump looks louder, and smaller." Trump, however, couldn't help himself. At a rally in Ohio, he mocked Denzel again, calling him another fake tough guy from a fake city. The crowd cheered, but even on live television, you could see that something had changed. The cheers were thinner, more hesitant, a noise of habit, not conviction. When clips from that rally hit social media, users flooded the comments, "He's rattled. This isn't strength, it's insecurity." Denzel, on the other hand, refused to engage. He continued promoting his new film, greeting fans, talking about community outreach, and occasionally dropping lines that felt like veiled responses to the chaos. At one press event, he said, "Sometimes leadership is just knowing when not to speak." The crowd went silent before bursting into applause. It was as if he distilled the entire controversy into a single sentence. By the end of the week, late-night hosts, foreign journalists, and even political analysts were united on one point: Denzel had become something rare in modern America, a voice that could criticize power without sounding partisan. He hadn't just confronted Trump, he'd redefined the tone of resistance. And as the weekend dawned, it was clear, this story wasn't over. It was evolving. By the following Monday, the energy in Washington felt different, like the air just before a thunderstorm. Inside the White House, advisors whispered about the Denzel effect, a term coined by a political analyst on CNN after seeing approval ratings dip across multiple demographics. It wasn't just liberals or Hollywood fans, veterans, educators, and even small business owners were echoing his message: "You forgot the hungry." Trump's Asia trip, once meant to project strength and global leadership, had become a symbol of detachment. Images of him laughing with billionaires in Tokyo while news networks showed struggling American families at food banks spread like wildfire. And in every repost, every commentary thread, Denzel's calm voice from the Kimmel interview resurfaced: "Leadership isn't about ego. It's about empathy." Those words, delivered with surgical precision, had outlasted every press release the administration tried to push. Behind the scenes, conservative donors were furious. They accused Trump's inner circle of mishandling the response, claiming that Denzel had outmaneuvered the entire communications apparatus without even trying. A leaked memo from a senior strategist read, "This isn't about policy anymore. It's about perception. And we are losing." The media devoured it, using it to fuel days of headlines. The administration's attempt to smear Denzel had backfired spectacularly. Meanwhile, Denzel remained unshaken. He appeared briefly on a late-night charity telethon, thanking veterans and first responders. When asked about the controversy, he simply smiled and said, "America's watching, not me, not him, but itself." The line became iconic. Within 24 hours, it was printed on shirts, quoted in newsrooms, and even referenced in international commentary pieces. The BBC called it the most graceful defiance of 2025. What made this moment powerful wasn't Denzel's celebrity, it was his humanity. In an era where shouting was the norm, he had chosen restraint. In a country divided by outrage, he had chosen clarity. The world was indeed watching, but what it saw wasn't chaos or conflict, it saw reflection. By midweek, something unthinkable happened. Polls showed that a majority of Americans, across party lines, agreed that the moral compass of the nation is better represented by its artists than its politicians. For the first time in years, hope felt louder than hate. And somewhere, far from cameras and microphones, Denzel simply exhaled, a man who had said enough, and in doing so, changed everything. The dust had barely settled when analysts began calling it the speechquake. Trump's Asia tour, meant to project dominance, had instead collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance, and Denzel's response had become the moral reckoning of the decade. Across talk shows, classrooms, and dinner tables, Americans debated one thing: when did empathy stop being patriotic? Behind closed doors, the administration was in damage control mode. Leaked memos revealed that economic advisors were scrambling to redirect attention toward foreign trade wins, but no one was listening. The headlines had already chosen their narrative: Denzel Washington speaks for the forgotten. It was a headline even his fiercest critics couldn't ignore. Every soundbite, every still frame from that Kimmel interview became cultural currency. Analysts described it as the moment Hollywood became Washington's conscience. Denzel himself didn't celebrate. He kept filming, visiting community centers, and quietly funding meal programs under aliases, refusing to let the moment become about him. But America noticed. When a viral clip surfaced of a child saying, "Denzel fed my family," donations poured in. The movement that followed was spontaneous, leaderless, and powerful. They called it #TheHungry Movement, and within a month, it had inspired real policy discussions on food insecurity, something no political speech had achieved in years. Trump's response grew more erratic. He claimed Denzel's philanthropy was a publicity stunt, but even his most loyal pundits struggled to defend him. Ratings for his appearances dropped. Poll numbers sank. One commentator quipped, "He didn't lose to Denzel the actor, he lost to Denzel the human." Meanwhile, late-night monologues turned reflective. Jimmy Kimmel aired a tribute montage, showing Denzel's speech alongside real families helped by his initiatives. The clip ended with Kimmel's quiet line, "Sometimes the loudest truth is spoken softly." By now, the world had shifted. Denzel's words had crossed oceans, resonating with those tired of performative power. International outlets described it as the American awakening. Universities dissected his composure as a masterclass in modern rhetoric. For Trump, it was the beginning of political isolation. For Denzel, it was something deeper, a legacy built not on fame, but on principle. He hadn't shouted, insulted, or sought revenge. He had simply held up a mirror. And America, for the first time in a long while, didn't look away. The moment the world realized it wasn't just another celebrity soundbite came quietly, not in the roar of applause, but in the collective silence of reflection. Denzel's calm, deliberate words had cut deeper than any politician's campaign slogan, "You forgot the hungry." That sentence became the mirror America didn't want to look into. In the weeks that followed, protests and town halls erupted nationwide. Not angry, chaotic ones, but gatherings of unity. People from every background showed up with signs reading, "We remember the hungry." Church groups, high school students, veterans, and even some disillusioned Republicans joined in. It wasn't about parties anymore, it was about conscience. Major outlets dubbed it the Denzel Doctrine, the belief that morality must outlive politics. Meanwhile, Trump's press team tried to drown out the movement with counter-messaging, but it was too late. Every time he spoke, it sounded smaller, pettier. The contrast between his defiance and Denzel's composure only magnified the difference between noise and truth. As one political commentator said, Trump shouted at America. Denzel spoke to it. Internationally, Denzel's message echoed as a reminder of what leadership could look like. In Europe, editorial columns praised his restraint. In Africa, newspapers celebrated his integrity. Even Japan, the epicenter of Trump's ill-fated trip, aired documentaries analyzing how a single interview reshaped the global perception of American decency. For Denzel, the victory was never personal. In an interview weeks later, he said softly, "If one child eats tonight because people cared enough to listen, that's the win." The crowd fell silent. In that stillness, the message transcended politics, fame, and ideology. It became something spiritual, a moral revival hidden inside a media storm. And as the credits rolled on that turbulent chapter of American history, one truth lingered: sometimes revolutions don't start with anger, they start with empathy. Because when the noise fades, when the lights dim, and when the powerful finally fall silent, the voice that remains is the one that dared to care. Denzel Washington's calm fire changed more than headlines, it shook the conscience of a nation. When the cameras fade and the applause dies, what remains isn't who shouted loudest, but who spoke the truth with purpose. Tonight, we saw a man challenge power not with rage, but with reason, and in doing so, he reminded the world that real leadership begins where ego ends. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Reflect. Share. Speak up. Because silence feeds the powerful, but truth, even whispered, can shake empires. Subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth behind the noise. And remember, empathy is strength.